All right, guys. So last night, I was actually 2 nights ago, I was making salsa, and because I've been experimenting with different things, and maybe you want me to just go micless? Oh no, you're okay. You'll be all right. All right. And so I'm chopping up the jalapenos because that gives it a little more punch, right, to the salsa. I don't know. Do you put jalapenos in your salsa, Chloe? A little bit. It tastes good, but the problem was I got a little bit of the jalapeno juice on my fingers, and I rubbed my nose. Made that mistake, and then my nose started burning. I'm like, oh man, that's painful, and I kept rubbing it, not sure what's going on, and then I realized, oh shoot, I got jalapeno juice like on my nose. And so I run to the sink because it's burning, it's super painful, and I wash my face, and that makes it worse. It's like when you have something hot and put water in your mouth, it like makes it worse and worse and worse. And so I'm like furiously Googling what to do, like how to get this pain out of my nose. And I found out that, does anyone know what to do in that situation? What? Yeah, milk, exactly. Pour it up, be confident in yourself, man. Poured a bowl of milk and just sat my nose in it for like 5 minutes. And did you get that snap? Did I send that snap to you? Maybe Benny. No, I didn't. That's just you and Tim. And Benny, I think. But so I just let my nose sit there in the milk for a while. But that was some serious suffering that I went through. And so it was brutal. But I lived. I made it through. I'm here tonight. So thank you. But on a more serious note, it was 17 years ago, yesterday, that my sister and I were out in our field digging a hole. My sister Nicole. Now, you might be wondering, why were you digging a hole? I don't really remember. We didn't have cell phones back then, so that's just kind of what you had to find other ways to pass the time, So we're digging a hole before school, and my neighbor runs out and goes, "We're under attack!" I'm like, what? Like, what's going on, And I'm like, wow, she's really lost it, So I just went inside to get away from my crazy neighbor, and then we turn on the TV and realize we really were under attack, right? September 11th. Did you guys talk about that in school yesterday? A few of you. Which is crazy to me that you guys probably don't really remember that. Maybe some of you 18 or 19-year-olds do, and, sorry if you're still in high school and you're 19, but some of us staff members remember that. Pretty crazy. 19 young men from a terrorist group called Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 airplanes, crashing 3 of them into the World Trade Center. Both the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon. There's that iconic photo, which kind of gives you the chills there as that second plane goes to crash into the building. Nearly 3,000 people will die before the day's over. Family members, friends, firefighters, policemen. Some of them die instantly from the impact. Some of them will suffer from the smoke. Some of them will burn. Some of them will jump to their death, seeing that that's the best way out. Countless others will die later from cancer and respiratory illness and even war. So a pretty serious problem, a pretty serious thing that happened in our country, and it left many asking, is God real? How could God let this happen to us? Where is God in all of this? Now granted, evil people did this. Evil people attacked us, but then there's been tsunamis and earthquakes and hurricanes that have left children without their parents and parents without their children. And in all these cases, there's no one to blame in the case of a hurricane or tsunami, except God. How could God allow these horrible things to happen? And so we're in a series called Think. And last week, Austin talked about the word apologetics. Does anyone remember what that word means? Apologetics, anybody? Jacob? You got this, man. Believe in yourself. What was it?
Defending your faith.
Yeah, there you go, Kobe. Good leadership. Defending the faith. That's captain material right there. So Austin talked about that, particularly in regards to the Bible, right? Why do we believe? Why do we trust this thing? Why do we believe in God? Why do we trust in Jesus? Doesn't this book have a lot of contradictions? How do we know that bad men with cigars didn't write this in a basement somewhere to make a lot of money off of all of us? You know, these are questions that people have, and I think Austin did a good job addressing those and gave us some good things to think through. Today we're going to address another challenge to the Christian faith, one of the biggest ones I think that people are asking, and that is the problem of evil and suffering. Now, I gave you a lot of information on your sheet, so there's not a lot of room to draw funny pictures, so sorry about that. I guess you can flip to the other side. But I just wanted to give you a resource that you could take home with you, give you some good quotes in Scripture, and some things like that. To some people, one of the biggest questions, wondering if God exists, is, well, because all the suffering happens, does that disprove God's existence? So the argument is worded like this. It's at the top of your notes and also on the screen. If a good and powerful God exists, He would not allow pointless evil and suffering. Point 2, there is pointless evil and suffering. Conclusion, there is no God. So that's, have you guys seen kind of an argument to that regard from your peers or in classrooms? Anybody? Just Austin? Just Karen? No? A few of you? Okay, good. All right. Yeah, so in some form or another, people think that way sometimes. And so I have 5 things for us to think through as we maybe try to disprove this or think of some ways that Christianity approaches suffering. So the first, if you're taking notes, the problem of evil is a problem for everyone. You're like, okay, thanks, Captain Obvious. What I mean by that is not that everyone suffers, although that's true. Some of us more than others. But what I mean by that is it's a philosophical or a thinking problem for everyone. As Christians, we recognize the problem of evil and suffering. We can't hide from it or dismiss it. It's a problem we need to think about. But the atheist, someone who doesn't believe in God, has to deal with this problem too. For example, a non-believer might say to me, there's so much evil, there's so much pointless suffering in the world, I just can't believe in God. You guys might have heard that too. But I might respectfully respond with, why is suffering bad if God's not real? If God doesn't exist, why is suffering wrong? Because if God's not real, if we came from nothing, evolution requires death and destruction and the strong eating the weak to work, to survive. Right? Violence of the strong against the weak. This is perfectly normal and natural in the animal world. So if we're just the best animals, the strongest animals, then what's the problem if God's not real? So that is kind of one perspective of natural evil, natural suffering, but it's the same with evil, with people who do messed up things. Think of those priests that we heard on the news that they abused hundreds of kids in Pennsylvania. Really sad. And both my atheist friends and I would agree that that is wrong. It's wrong. But why is it wrong? Because we think everyone should be treated right and justly and fairly, but why? Why do we feel that way? I think it's because, and I would say as a Christian, we feel this way because God's put that sense of justice and fairness and righteousness on our hearts. But the atheist, although he or she could be a very good person and live a moral life, I don't think they have a higher sense, a higher law or higher authority that they can appeal to. Does that make sense? An atheist might say, well, it feels wrong. Well, what if for someone it doesn't feel wrong? An atheist could say, well, it's illegal in our society to, for example, abuse children, but there's been other societies where that's not illegal. Other older ancient cultures where slavery was okay, or treating women was poorly was okay, or murdering the next door tribe was cool. Which we agree that today that's wrong. C.S. Lewis, Austin talked about him a lot last week. He was the man who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. He had this dilemma in his mind. He used to be an atheist. You might not have known that. And he realized he had this problem because he was an atheist. He didn't believe in God. But then he got very angry at the suffering and evil in the world. And he realized that he was mad at God. Which is kind of funny, right? He's mad at the God that he doesn't believe in. And he realized, oh wow, I think I do believe in God. Because I'm angry at these evils in the world. And so C.S. Lewis would later become a Christian and write some good books. So, I mean, so that's the last question I'd ask the atheist is, on what basis, with what reason can you call something morally wrong? Right? Outside of our culture, outside of our feelings. So all this to say, I think the Christianity has a better set of resources to deal with this issue of evil. Not to solve it, but to think through it. Well, let's go to this next point. Remember that argument I quoted earlier, right, about, if a good and powerful God exists. We can go to the argument, Austin. There you go. If a good and powerful God exists, he would not allow pointless evil or suffering. There is pointless evil and suffering, therefore there is no God. So if there's one word that's probably the hole in this argument, which word do you think it might be? Pointless. Very good. Pointless. Yes, I think that is where the argument falls apart. So point 2 in your notes is pain doesn't have to be pointless. Pain doesn't have to be pointless. If the goal of life is carefree comfort and easy happiness, then yes, pain should be avoided at all costs. It is pointless. But if you want your life to mean more than just going with the flow, then pain doesn't have to be pointless. 3 ways that pain doesn't have to be pointless. First, suffering can give us a stronger character. I think Kelly Clarkson had it right when she said, what doesn't kill you can make you stronger. Right? There's some truth to that. Think about it. Anything good in your life, any growth or strength or development, took discomfort. In the weight room, right, guys? You guys doing squats? You guys pretty sore? Yeah, Tanner was moving like an old man at practice yesterday because that pain begins to make you stronger. There's something about pain, about hard times that can, if we don't get bitter, make us into stronger, better people. People more like Jesus. Suffering can also prepare us to help others. Some of you are familiar with the story of Joseph at the end of Genesis, but if not, that's okay. I'll summarize it real quickly. It's at the end of Genesis, and to summarize, Joseph is his dad's favorite son out of 12. And the brothers hate him because of this. So they decide to kill him. You thought your siblings hated you, right? They want to kill their brother, but at the last moment they change their mind and sell him into slavery instead. So, what's better, you know? So they sell him into slavery in Egypt. They lie to their dad, tell him that, little Joey got eaten by a hyena, and they fake his death. So Joseph goes to Egypt, and right when things start looking up, his boss's Egyptian princess wants to be friends with benefits. All right? And Joseph says no over and over and over again. So the princess eventually lies and tells her husband that Joseph's trying to get with her. So Joseph gets thrown into the dungeon. He's in slavery, and then he gets thrown into the prison. But long story short, Joseph gets out of jail and becomes the second most powerful man in Egypt, next to Pharaoh. So, during a famine, his brothers come down to Egypt, and Joseph sees them again. What would you do? Would you exact revenge? If Joseph was like me, I'd probably throw those brothers into jail, throw that lady in jail, throw my old boss in jail. But Joseph doesn't do that. He says this to his brothers to relieve their fears. It'll be on the screen here. Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what's now being done, the saving of many lives." I think it's from that verse and from Romans 8:28 that song Matt sang, "You make all things work together to my good." That's kind of where that comes from. There's a lady in our church that told me that many years ago, in college, she became a Christian, and the very night she became a Christian, a man broke into her house and violated her. And in the months and years following, as she healed emotionally and mentally, her church was going through the Joseph story. And as she's going through the story for the first time, she wonders, like as Joseph begins to get in this powerful position, how is Joseph going to treat his enemies? What is he going to do when he reunites with his brothers? When he's in charge? What kind of punishment will he inflict on them? And as the church got to the end of the Joseph story, she was shocked. Why? Because Joseph didn't repay evil for evil. Joseph forgave. Why? Because God intended it for good, for the saving of many lives. And so this lady has gone to help hundreds, if not thousands, of women in similar situations, which is pretty cool. So suffering can help us help others. Suffering can also bring us closer to God. C.S. Lewis writes this: God whispers in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It's his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Similar to Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I think that's true. I wish Grayson was here today. Last week he said in groups, he was talking about like how when times are good, it's easy to not pray, but when times are bad, why do we seem to draw closer to God, want to pray more to Him? And I think what he was saying was really true. I know that's been my life, right? When things are bad, that's when I'm more likely to pray and depend on God and ask Him for help. When things are good, maybe I can just begin to rely on myself. It's always kind of funny to mention, and you guys get a kick out of it, but every time I got dumped, which was many times in my life, I was always sad, you know. One time I even bawled my eyes out. Just ask Tim about it maybe. Actually, I don't think I ever cried in front of him. But even in those sad times, the closeness I got to experience with God in those moments made it worth it. And came with a lot of good sermon illustrations too. So, my pain, your gain, guys. My pain, your gain. Okay. And not only Christians, but guys, I think sometimes when non-believers go through hard times, it draws them into a relationship with Jesus. Many people in New York after 9/11 would be in church the next Sunday, and some of them would come to know Christ. While I would never wish hard times on anyone, sometimes God will use those low moments to help people to find Him. So I guess my encouragement in all that is to don't waste your pain. Don't waste your pain. It doesn't have to be pointless. I'm not saying like go look for it or go whip yourself or, but God will use the pain that you can't control in your life. Well, 3, let's keep moving here. This one's really important, I think, is we don't have all the answers. And that's okay. I mean, you might be thinking, all right, Tyler, I can see how some evil might have a point and purpose in our lives. But what about like a really, the kinds of evil that makes your stomach, sick? Like, kids dying. I mean, they don't get to get closer with God or, or stronger or get to help anyone through this. I think it's really important to stop and recognize the problem. Right? It truly is a problem. There are no easy, cliche answers that we can pose. And I think anyone that has it like, oh, I know the answer to the problem of evil. You should have your caution signs up. Red flags, because I think they're fooling themselves. I think they're arrogant and insensitive. At some level, evil's always been a mystery. Sometimes Christians, we can come across like we have all the answers. And maybe you feel like that, man, in this Apologetics series, man, Austin's so smart, like I don't know if I could ever talk to my friends about the Bible that way. And really, it's okay to say, I don't know. Let's look into that. Or, man, I'm really sorry that happened to you. How can I help? We don't have to have all the answers, guys. Deuteronomy 29:29, that's an easy Bible verse to remember there. The secret things belong to the Lord, our God, but the things revealed belong to us and our children forever. And in not knowing all the answers, which is humble and normal and okay, we do know one thing. We do know what the answer is not. The answer is not because God doesn't care. The answer is not because God doesn't care. And why do we know this? Point 4. God is both a sovereign and a suffering God. A sovereign and a suffering God. First, what do we mean by sovereign? Sovereign means God's in total control. Nothing is out of His hands. As Joseph said, God is working things out for good, even the bad things in our lives. And some people get upset by this, like, man, God's allowing these horrible things to happen, but I'm more terrified of the other possibility of there being no God, and all this suffering and pain is totally pointless. Now, God's in total control, but He's also a suffering God. What do I mean? Well, we look at God and the human person of Jesus, and we see that Jesus experiences the same things that we experience. He gets really tired and thirsty and hungry. His dad dies. His friend Lazarus dies. He did raise Lazarus, so that was kind of cool. But his hometown friends and even his family reject him for a season. They think he's crazy. He's frequently misunderstood, lied about, gossiped about. He's even tempted by the devil himself. Then at the end of his life, he's betrayed by close friends. And the rest of his other friends run away from him and abandon him. And then many of you know the rest of the story. He's beaten and whipped and has nails driven through his wrists and his feet as he dies a death of crucifixion. Most painfully, he takes all the sin and suffering of the world onto himself in a kind of mysterious way as the innocent, willing victim. And he dies and says, "It is finished." And Jesus is still with us today, even after accomplishing that amazing sacrifice. He still feels our pain and suffering with us. There's a story we talked through in Acts where this bad guy named Paul, he is trying to kill Christians and throw them in jail. And Jesus is in heaven, but Jesus kind of makes an appearance to Paul, and he stops Paul right in his tracks and says, "Paul, Paul, why are you persecuting me? Why are you hurting me, Paul?" But that's kind of confusing, because how is Paul hurting Jesus? What do you guys think? How is Paul hurting Jesus? Yeah.
In all of them?
Because he's attacking like the Christians.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You were close, Carter. So Paul is attacking the Christians, but Jesus says, "Paul, you're attacking me." What does that mean? That means the things, the pains that we experience, Jesus is so connected with us that He experiences and walks with us through those things. It's pretty cool. Well, fifth and finally, the resurrection means all of our suffering will be undone. Tim didn't leave that one blank for you because he thought you might mess it up. Just kidding. Resurrection is a big word. But for the Christian, we find great comfort not only in the cross, but also in the resurrection. And not just Jesus' resurrection, but our own. Now, there's a lot of confusion about resurrection. We might think zombie, like all the zombie movies and shows, Walking Dead and stuff. It's not like we're raised to be zombies. We're actually raised to be better than ever before. It's almost like we're zombies now. And we're going to get raised and restored back to life. And not just back to the way it is now, but the way, the body you always wanted. Right? Restored, complete. As Tim Keller says, this means that every horrible thing that ever happened will not only be undone and repaired, but will in some way make the eventual glory and joy even greater. To illustrate, how many of you have ever been in a dream, maybe it was this brutal nightmare, where something horrible happened? You guys ever experienced that? You have a bad dream. I remember a horrible dream as a young boy where Natalie and Nicole were getting burned alive by the bad guy in Fox and the Hound. It was very terrible. And then the bad guy threw me in the fire. And I woke up sweating and crying. But you know what happens when you wake up? You have that sense of relief. You appreciate your life a little bit more. I appreciated my sisters for the next 30 seconds. I gave them a hug, I think. There's more of an appreciation. I think that's an imperfect example, waking up from a nightmare, of what it's going to be like when we wake up in heaven. Right? For what's coming for us as Christians. It gives us hope. And that word hope is kind of thrown around today like, man, I hope I pass my test. I hope the Ducks win. I hope I don't get dumped. But the Christian idea of hope is not like a wish. It's an expectation. Right? I know this is going to happen. I'm confident this is going to happen. At the end of Lord of the Rings, the third one, Samwise Gamgee finds out that his friend Gandalf is actually still alive, or has risen from the dead. And he exclaims, Sam says this, "Gandalf, I thought you were dead, but then I thought I was dead myself. Is everything sad going to come untrue?" And the answer that Christianity gives to Sam's question is yes. Everything sad is going to come untrue. Everything sad is going to come untrue in such a way that it'll somehow be greater for having once been lost and gained back. And this is pretty cool, guys. God's ultimate defeat of sin, suffering, and evil, He'll so defeat it that everything bad that has happened will only serve to make our joy and eternity that much better. Infinitely greater. So I want to close by reading you one short passage of Scripture out of Revelation. This is one of the last books of the Bible, one of the last paragraphs in the Bible. The Apostle John says this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and old earth had disappeared, and the sea was gone. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, 'Look, God's home is now among His people. He will live with them and they will be His people. God Himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever.' And the one sitting on the throne says, 'Look, I'm making everything new.'" It's pretty cool, huh? Let's end on that. I'm going to say a prayer for us. Father, I think of the people in here who've suffered a lot more than I have. And I pray for those people tonight that maybe have experienced pain in their lives. And but I pray that they would see that you're with them in that you suffered with them, and that you are working it out in their lives for a greater sense of joy and glory. For people tonight that might be doubting your existence, I pray that you've given some good things to think about. And Father, for a great time in groups. In Jesus' name, amen.